From my watchtower, I watched the Black Death silence this village. Coughs turned to graves, and no blade could halt it. Could you endure what I witnessed? Step closer, for tonight we keep vigil together. This is the medieval stories, marked by the stained glass knight and the city beneath him. Here we share weekly 10 to 20-minute tales with the occasional 1 to 2 hour sleep special for those who wish for longer journeys. Tonight, a medieval Black Death history story time waits for you. The night is still. Soft wind brushes stone, a distant bell tolls, and a slow breath carries us forward toward the first signs of the plague's arrival. This was the silent invasion. Picture this, a market morning when the baker's cough echoed through the square, and by dusk his stall stood abandoned. Sound of an empty market, a stray cartwheel creaking, a faint bell tolling slower than before. The plague did not come with banners, nor with the clash of armies. It slipped ashore unnoticed and walked among us. In England, the plague first reached the coast in 1348, arriving on ships from overseas, carried within the holds by rats and their unseen fleas. We barred our gates when word reached us, but the effort was hollow. Wealth and trade carried this plague inward along the same routes that had once made our village prosper. Strangers and goods flowed along those paths, and with them came an invisible weight. You might picture a lone trader crossing the gate with sacks of wool, his footsteps ordinary, his fate unknowing. In truth, he brought more than cloth. He carried the shadow of the wider world into our narrow lanes. From my tower, I watched the first families react. They sealed their doors with cloth and wax, pressed shut the shutters, and they believed isolation might spare them. A long pause, then silence. Their prayers slipped out through cracks in the wood, muffled by fear. Soon the church bells grew still. No more calls to mass, no tolls for the rising sun or the fading light. Instead, the air filled with the repetitive thud of spades outside the churchyard as graves widened into pits. That dull rhythm was relentless, a counting of the fallen carried on the wind. Historical records remind us how this truly came to pass. What visited us was Yersinia pestis, born from Central Asia along the arteries of the Silk Road and spilling into Europe by trade. Merchant ships, markets, caravans, all the lifelines of a connected world became the veins of pestilence. Prosperity became peril. Connection became contagion. The cost was sudden and merciless. Families vanished in a span of days. Entire households silenced overnight. The disease moved with terrifying speed, striking through contact, through the very breath that sustained us. The truth was stark. No wall, no gate, no pious act could bar it. So you have seen how the plague crept quietly into our midst, how it invaded without a battle cry. Let me show you next how death revealed itself, for it did not wear one mask alone, but came to us in 3 terrible faces. Picture the forms in which the pestilence struck us, 3 faces of death, each with its own terror. The first and most common was the bubonic plague. It declared itself through swollen lymph nodes, buboes, in the groin, armpits, or neck. Contemporary accounts likened these swellings to the size of oranges, hard as stone, and burning with fever. Physicians at the time grimly called them God's tokens, signs no one wished upon their household. When they burst, the stench could choke an entire room, and within days, death followed. This form spread through the bite of fleas carried by rats, slipping into our clothes, our beds, our skin. Then there was pneumonic plague, the lungs undoing. Unlike the bubonic form, it spread from person to person through the very air. Imagine a single cough in a market hall, and a dozen lives set upon the path to the grave. Victims coughed up blood, gasping through crimson foam, and often succumbed within hours of their first symptoms. Records show this form could be fatal in 90 to 95% of cases once it took hold. And because it needed no flea or rat to travel, entire families were extinguished almost overnight. And we saw the grip of septicemic plague, the most merciless of all. Here the sickness invaded the blood itself, leaving little time for cries or remedies. Many fell in the fields or along the streets before anyone could speak their name aloud. their skin blackened at the edges, fingers, toes, lips, so that they seemed already rotting while breath still clung to them. Some passed with scarcely a mark beyond that dark stain, swift and silent, as if consumed from within. Each of these forms carried its own horror, the stench of ruptured buboes, the wet rattle of bloody coughs, the blackened flesh of those struck down in moments. Lord and peasant stood equal in terror's grasp. No weapon, no fortress, no prayer proved a defense. Yet still, in the midst of this, men of learning stepped forward to confront what they did not understand. They came armed not with steel, but with theories and tools, certain in their remedies, though powerless against what faced us. Consider now the physicians, their reputation wrapped in crimson robes and heavy books. You can picture their confidence as they entered homes, certain that knowledge alone would push back the plague. That certainty became what I call the physician's folly. They leaned on the old teachings of Galen, convinced that human life owed itself to a balance of four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness, they told us, was the tipping of this scale. Their chosen remedy was bloodletting, meant to draw away the excess. But this practice left the dying weaker still. Worse, they used the same lancets from one patient to another without cleansing, which likely spread the infection further. When their tools clinked, hope drained away with the blood. Herbal waters and poultices followed, vinegar baths, rosewater rinses, but they answered nothing. Remedies like these could not touch a sickness born of Yersinia pestis. Their methods were like rearranging the furniture while a house burns. Say this slowly, softly, the flames still consumed all within. And then came Theoriac, the prized compound, a substance assembled from dozens of rare ingredients, even the flesh of vipers. It was costly, elusive, and offered as if the exotic itself carried authority. Families poured their savings into small doses, praying the bitterness might buy more time. But no matter how much of it was swallowed, the end was the same. Other desperate remedies were whispered too, strange and costly, reflecting only how far people would go when nothing worked. For us, the physician's confidence was not comfort but danger. Their authority promised relief even as their tools hastened death. And when their words rang hollow, the trust that bound village life began to falter. If even the learned could not protect us, who then possessed the power to hold our world together? That is what came next, the unraveling of more than bodies. While clergymen and healers failed, the very ties of community began to fray. And in that fraying, you will see how fear reshaped the living as surely as the plague struck down the dead. By the light of a single torch, I watched the bonds that held our village together begin to unravel. As homes emptied and silence spread, suspicion grew louder than prayers. Neighbors shouted across deserted lanes, blaming one another for poisoned wells. Jews and other minorities were falsely accused and suffered violent persecution despite dying at similar rates. Fear demanded scapegoats when the true enemy could not be seen. Beyond the churchyard, mass graves widened into pits. Their stench was carried on the wind, heavy and bitter. So many died that no priest could say the rites. We dropped handfuls of lime and soil onto stacked bodies before moving on to the next. Even the strongest order faltered. Lords and labourers perished alike. Manor houses stood abandoned, while fields, untended, withered into waste. Villages once bound by custom lost their shape overnight, the rhythm of daily life scattered in ashes and silence. Historical accounts describe mortality often estimated at roughly 30 to 60% in parts of Europe. A loss so vast shattered the ground beneath our feet. Labour shortages followed in its wake, shifting the balance of power. Surviving peasants found they could demand more for their work, challenging lords who had once ruled unopposed. In response, rulers tried to hold back the tide. In England, for example, Parliament passed the Statute of Labourers in 1351 to fix wages. Yet the scarcity of hands to sow and reap proved more powerful than law, and the old order bent until it cracked. The church, long the centre of our days, could not escape. Priests and monks who gave last rites often died soon after, leaving parishes abandoned. Monasteries closed. Incense smoke no longer veiled despair. Markets too fell silent when merchants and bankers succumbed in distant cities. The great webs of credit, trade and trust that bound nations together weakened until they tore. This was the Vigil of Witness. My sword offered no aid, nor did armor hold back the fevered breath that spread unseen. To fight was impossible. To watch was necessary. In that stillness, I chose a different kind of strength. While others fled or denied, I kept the vigil here, recording and remembering so that something might be kept alive. We could not hold the living, but we could guard their memory. I marked the days when doors were sealed, when a family's windows remained dark. I heard the gravedigger's shovels at dawn and wrote of their grim rhythm. I noted how voices vanished from the marketplace until only the core of crows remained. In bearing witness, I discovered that endurance could be more powerful than resistance. It was not passive, it was remembrance. Each word I set down was a small defiance against forgetting. Chroniclers and letters of the time recorded what survivors themselves could not bury. Priests in Paris spoke of their own brethren falling in numbers higher than the laity, because so many gave last rites to the dying. These records stitched fragments of truth into history when entire parishes failed. Like them, I found resolve in the act of documenting what neither sword nor sermon could halt. The toll weighed heavily. I listened to neighbors turn upon each other. I saw children left to fate in the street. I heard the last sighs of friends carried in the midnight air. To write of these things tore at the heart, yet through such words despair found purpose. The chronicles I kept became a bridge between this village and you, between the silence of our suffering and an enduring memory. Thus I changed. Once I was a knight who faced enemies in battle lines. Now I was a chronicler of silence, a witness to truths that steel could never touch. In holding this vigil, I preserved what mattered most, the fact that we endured, even in death, because our story was not erased. And now, you must ask yourself, if placed in our world of sickness and silence, without your knowledge of medicine or sanitation, could you have endured as we did? Why you would not survive lies not in your strength, but in what you would be forced to live without. Without germ theory or antibiotics, you would likely have been forced to rely on similar remedies to ours. Remedies we now know were ineffective or even harmful. Your drinking water would seep from wells fouled by waste where open drains ran through the streets. Those same streets, thick with refuse and filth, bred the rats whose fleas carried death from house to house. You would have shared cramped rooms where family, livestock and the sick pressed close together, with no knowledge of how infection traveled in such air. The physicians you turned to would have trusted knives more than knowledge. Their bloodletting with unsterilized lancets spread sickness with each cut, making patients weaker while the plague spread further. The theory of humours trapped their reasoning, leaving you no chance of antibiotics or masks. Today, antibiotics can treat Yersinia pestis if given early. Medicine we lacked then. That single fact marks the gulf between your world and ours. Even isolation offered only a false comfort. Venice pioneered 30 to 40-day isolation in 1348, the origin of the word quarantine. But such measures often came too late. Once the pestilence entered a village, no law or wall could stop its course. Without organized public health systems to track, contain, and guard against outbreaks, you would have faced the same fate. Silence spreading faster than news. The terror itself would undo many. Imagine mortality so overwhelming that diggers could not keep pace, and clergy fell faster than they could bless. Modern life leans on mental health supports, but in our time none existed. The sight of families abandoned, of pits filled under torchlight, broke hearts beyond mending. The very psychology of survival could have crushed you more swiftly than the disease itself. At its heart, survival in 1348 depended not on skill or strength, but on sheer chance. Luck of exposure, luck of breath, luck of the flea. Yet in the wreckage, some unexpected changes followed. Changes that shaped what came after. In the end, what remained was not battle, but memory. The Black Death revealed how fragile we are, yet also how deeply societies can endure and transform. Labor shortages, shifting power, and the weakening of old institutions showed that catastrophe alters more than lives. It reshapes the world itself. Like this story, comment below with a medieval tale you'd love to hear next, and subscribe for more fascinating history from the Middle Ages. We publish new 10 to 20 minute episodes every week, with the occasional 1 to 2 hour sleep special for your longer nights. We were not only survivors, we learned to remember. Rest now.